Welcome to Season 4 of the Art of Teaching podcast. I'm Matthew Green and I'm so grateful that you joined me today. Before we get started, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you that have subscribed, listened and reviewed the episodes. I really do appreciate you taking the time. Welcome to another episode of the Art of Teaching podcast. Viviane Robinson is currently a professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Auckland and academic director for its Centre for Educational Leadership. She is also a visiting professor at the London Institute of Education, and she gained her PhD in clinical psychology from Harvard University in 1976. Her work centres around organisational psychology in education. Her research is concerned with organisational learning and leadership, instructional leadership, school effectiveness and improvement, and research methodology. In this discussion, we talk about why change isn't always desirable and why we should be focusing on improvement instead, and why change may actually be perpetuating leader and teacher burnout. We also talked about how we can move away from quick fixes and why we should adopt a more comprehensive improvement process. It was an incredible privilege to speak with Viviane, and I'm so thankful that she took the time to speak with me. I hope that you enjoy this wide-ranging discussion. Professor Viviane Robinson, thank you for so much for having a conversation with me. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
You're most welcome, Matthew.
I can see a beautiful window behind you. What's the view out of that window like? You mentioned that you live near a beach.
Well, the view out of the window behind me is of the bush on our property. The view out of the window to my left is Piha Beach, which is a surf beach on the west coast of Auckland on the Tasman Sea. So when I look out there, I can see the sea between Australia and New Zealand.
Are you an avid beach goer? Do you surf? Do you swim?
I swim. I body surf, swim in Trent.
Lovely, fantastic. And quite possibly the most important question for our conversation, what is your coffee order when I can finally buy you a coffee?
I only drink decaffeinated coffee.
Yeah.
Which is very good these days. If you get a good one, you can't tell the difference. A lot of people who come to our house and we only have decaf, they don't realise they're drinking decaf. And so my coffee order is a large double shot decaf flat white.
Fantastic. I will keep that in mind. If you could have a dinner party, obviously your family are not included in the head count, but who would you like to be there? Who would be great to sit down with and have a conversation with over dinner?
The people that I'd like to have a conversation with over dinner are Jane Campion, the New Zealand film director. Yes. I want to ask her why her movies are so bleak and why she hates men so much, because most of her movies are about toxic males in them one way or another. Okay. So that would be a really interesting thing to talk to her about. Whether that's true, whether she does want to portray the gender issues and the toxic masculinity. So I'd want to talk to her. In addition, Jacinda Ardern, our New Zealand Prime Minister.
Yes. She has come up a lot in dinner party invitations, Jacinda Ardern, this internationally as well, so she would be fascinating.
Yeah, so I'd want to talk to her. Then I would want to talk to Paul Krugman, who's a New York Times columnist, Nobel Prize winner in economics. So I'd like to talk to him, and particularly about why he left academia and how he sees the profession of economics, and why economists, why the dismal science of economics is dismal, and why there's no consensus about whether to have financial stimulus or financial cutbacks. They seem to be all over the place.
Amazing. That sounds like an incredible dinner party. It would be hard to organise all of those people, but if I can pull that off, I'll let you know and send you an invitation.
Yeah.
Look, Viviane, I was just wondering, what was your upbringing like? And can you give those people who aren't familiar with your work a bit of an outline of how you got to where you are today? Because my understanding is that it has been incredibly varied.
Yes, well, I don't know that it's been that varied, but I grew up in a family of teachers.
Yeah.
Like many educators. My mother was a classics scholar and a high secondary school teacher, taught Latin and classics. My father was a primary school teacher and a primary school principal, headmaster as it was called in those days. My uncle was a principal of a small rural school where most of the pupils were his own children. And so just education and educators were just a big part of our family upbringing.
Yeah.
And my parents didn't want me to be a teacher, partly, I think, because of the stress, even in those days, particularly my father, the stress he experienced. They wanted me to go to university. And so I remember walking home from primary school when I was about 10, thinking I wanted to go to university. And so that was one very big theme in my family. The other very big theme was that of public service.
Wow.
If you're lucky enough to be born with brains, you better use those brains for the good of everybody and to make the world a better place. So that was a very powerful theme in our family as well. And then when I went to university, I did a double degree in education and psychology. I did quite a lot of sociology as well. Then I went to Harvard for my doctorate and met Argyris and worked with Argyris and Shern and became an organisational psychologist. At one stage, I wondered about going into the corporate world, but that didn't feel very satisfying morally or any other way. And so I then got very serious about education and spent a lot of time in schools doing field work and have devoted my career to doing research that connects with and improves practice.
Gosh, fantastic. It's so inspiring to see and to see the volume of your work. I mean, your biography is extensive, but it's really lovely to see that even now, as you talk about some of the change that you've had, you light up, and it seems like it still excites you, the work that you're doing, which is really wonderful. And really refreshing. And I just wanted to, if you don't mind, Viviane, just to talk a little bit about your recent work. 2018 seems like a lifetime ago, but it is relatively recent, titled Reduce Changes to Increase Improvement. And I just wanted to read a quote to you, and I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind maybe unpacking it. And it says, planned changes often fail because those designing them underestimate the complexity of implementation, a complexity that is experienced by implementing agents but given too little attention by change leaders. Would you mind spending a few moments talking about that and maybe unpacking why that is so central to that particular work?
Yes. Well, actually, in order to answer that question, I have to answer some previous questions.
Yeah.
But in short, when you're let's take an example. You want you want a group of teachers to change from ability grouping to mixed ability teaching. And that's an example of the sort of change that schools, and indeed in New Zealand and some nationally, we're just starting to undertake because of the evidence about the relationship between ability grouping and inequitable opportunities to learn. Yes. And there's quite a lot of really important evidence about that. Now, one of the problems that leaders have is they don't spend enough time investigating why teachers want to hang on to ability grouping.
Yes.
Why they are opposed to mixed ability grouping. And because they haven't studied what teachers currently do in their ability grouping, and they certainly haven't dug into the theories of action that sustain the practice of ability grouping, they have no idea of the complexity of the change required.
Yes.
It is not just a matter of changing the grouping practices. In order to have ability grouping work successfully, and I'm thinking of maths, for example, yes. It usually goes with pedagogical changes, which means you have to have rich tasks, which serve students at multiple levels. You have to have those students be able to interact in that group and have them recognize that there are multiple entries into a complex maths comprehension problem, or so in order for that a change to become an improvement as opposed to just another failed change, you may find as leaders that you have to teach your teachers how to plan differently, how to construct rich tasks. You have teachers who cannot manage small groups, who cannot teach the peer culture that is required to have productive discussions in those small groups, who cannot assess the maths reasoning processes that you're trying to shift teachers away from numeracy into maths reasoning and comprehension. You have to change all of that, those beliefs and those practices. So it is not just a matter of changing grouping practices, it's a matter of changing assessment practices, teaching practices, lesson planning, behavior management, and peer teaching.
Yeah, absolutely.
So does that example sort of answer your question about why?
Absolutely, and it's such a broad question, and I think in particular your 2018 work I found incredibly challenging because you talked so much about the obsession with change that schools have, and also you really define the difference. Sorry, you talk about the difference between change and improvement. And I am in my role, things are changing. Gosh, every hour it seems like. And it really spoke to me in terms of, I never actually thought of the difference of those two things. So would you mind even just talking briefly about the difference between change and improvement, and why do you think in many ways we get it wrong as educational leaders?
Well, as I define both these concepts in the book, to change something simply means to do something different. That is all it means. And there's a truckload of examples in education where changes make things worse. So change is not necessarily desirable. Okay, the notion, it's what's called an honorific, the notion of changing, and the same with innovating. That concept, unfortunately, has acquired a positive tone. There is nothing positive about changing. It's neutral, and so is innovating. Just innovation just means doing something new. What you need to be shooting for is improvement, which is a whole lot more ambitious and harder than changing things or innovating.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I actually want to eliminate the notion that change is necessarily desirable and that innovation is necessarily desirable. A whole lot of it is a terrible waste of resources and leaders and teachers' time, let alone their students' time.
Absolutely.
Terrible waste because it doesn't produce improvement. Now, as one leader said to me, of course, when leaders change things, they expect improvement. They think it's going to improve. But if you've gone from ability to mixed ability grouping without investigating the complexity of current practice,
Absolutely.
you are headed for change that's not going to improve anything.
Yeah. Do you think change makes us feel like we are doing something that is productive and we are busy as opposed to actually making any difference at all?
Well, this is the possibly, but it is such a dysfunctional mindset. I mean, you are self-perpetuating teacher and leader burnout. You are absolutely self-perpetuating it by a mindset that says I'm doing stuff because I'm changing things.
Yeah. Yeah.
You actually need to be reframing that and saying, my job is to improve things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to change things.
Yeah.
Obviously, improvement requires change, but you are shooting for something that makes you much more thoughtful, much more disinclined to reach for the quick fix.
Yeah.
The solution-oriented focus, where you know, I use a medical analogy here, where Matthew, when you have a sore back, you don't expect when you go to see the doctor about it for the doctor to be writing the prescription before he's diagnosed the problem.
That would be ridiculous.
Yeah, because back problems are complex. They have in other words, what we're doing in education is we're writing the prescription and we haven't done the diagnosis. Yeah. And we do that all the time. And leaders that think that their job is to come up with the quick fix for their teachers' problems, all they're doing is writing the prescriptions.
Wow.
That's all they're doing. They haven't done the diagnosis. Yeah. And even if it's something that like leaders want to support their staff. So the staff's got a bright idea. School down the road's using this program or that program. I think that might help. And the teacher's volunteering and enthusiastic. What that leader should be doing is saying, what is the problem for which this program is meant to be the solution?
Yeah.
And how much study have you and others and me done of the problem and what its causes are? Have we diagnosed the problem?
Yeah.
And the answer is far too often, no, we haven't.
Yeah. It's so important, Vivian, just to take the time to actually really think about what is the problem we're trying to solve and not just jump on the bandwagon of whatever an educational publisher may be putting in front of you to use any kind of quick fix. So what are some of the essential components then to lead improvement? I know you talk a lot about theory of action, single and double loop learning, and a number of other concepts in your book, but how do we actually begin to lead successful improvements in schools? It's a very big question.
Yes, it is. Well, in the book, I've got, first of all, you stop the quick fix and you move into a more systematic problem-solving process.
Yeah.
So I present in the book with multiple examples, including the conversations you need to have with teachers who don't think that what you're suggesting is any good.
Yes.
I present a model and these examples of a 4-stage improvement process.
Yeah.
And those stages are very important. And lots, of course, of iterations that they're not just a linear sequence. The first thing is to get agreement that there is a problem to be solved. And leaders who cannot do what I call constructive problem talk are in trouble just in this stage, because they want to make some change because it's an opportunity, because it's something new, because it's a bright idea they've picked up at a conference or in a network meeting or something. So if I'm a busy, stressed out teacher, the last thing I want to hear from a leader is to change something because it's a great opportunity.
Absolutely.
You know, there's an infinite number of opportunities, and thank you very much, I'm not interested because I'm up to my neck already. So what I am interested in is if I have a problem of practice in my classroom or an student outcome problem, and you come along and say, Viviane, we've been working with these kids on writing for 6 months and it seems like their writing's not really improving. Would you agree? Yes, I say, I've done all, you know, I'm at my wit's end. I don't know what to do with these kids. Okay, Viviane, I think we should focus on that. I think that's an important problem for these reasons. Do you agree that we should work together on that? Yes, of course. I agree. I don't know how to do it, leader, but yeah, if you're coming to help me, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Now that's stage one done. We have an agreement that there is a problem to be solved. That is it. We may completely disagree on stage two, which is the causes of that writing problem. But that doesn't matter. We've got common ground. We both agree these kids' writing is not up to scratch. That's stage one. Done.
Yeah.
Then we move into stage two. And the leader says, okay, Viviane, given that we've been going around the circle on this writing problem for a while, I think we should do a diagnosis. We should get some good data to test our hunches about why this is going wrong, why these kids aren't learning how to write. Okay, and that introduces stage two. Inquire into the theories of action of the teacher that lead to the writing problem. Yes. And so you might say, yes, quite agree. The previous year, they didn't have very good teaching of writing, and I absolutely agree. They came into your class with low-level skills in writing. But we're here and now, and so I want to focus on how you're teaching writing, what you're teaching, how the kids are responding, which means looking closely at what you're doing and not doing to see if we can figure out what's happening for these kids. This is a no blame causal inquiry. And that's what stage two is about, investigating that teacher's theory of action for teaching writing. It's not their philosophy of teaching writing. It's not their hopes for teaching writing. It's not, it is, I'm going to see what you do, how you plan, how you teach, get some good behavioral evidence, how the kids respond, and your beliefs about why you teach them. Wow. So when I know why you're teaching it the way you are, then I'm going to talk to you about it and do a think aloud in a sense of finding out why you're teaching it that way. Yep. We will construct together your theory of action. Then I will know not only how you're teaching writing now, but why you're teaching it that way. I will do you the respect of listening to why you are teaching it the way you're teaching.
Yes, that's so important. Yep.
That is stage two.
Yeah.
Then at stage three, we begin to construct together an alternative theory of action.
Yeah.
We know that the current theory is not working well enough because the kids' writing's not improving. And the teacher's frustrated and dropping the amount of time they're teaching writing, so the opportunities to learn quantitatively are going down as well as qualitatively. Yes. So we construct an alternative. And then I, as leader, say, well, I'm not sure I know how to fix this. I know a little bit, but I do know that teacher down the corridor I've looked at her writing results for the same year level, and it seems to me that she's got better results, and I'm not sure why.
Yes.
I think the kids are similar to yours. So I would like us to talk with that teacher, work together. How do you feel about that? Because I think we have some expertise within the year level grouping, within the network. This could be across school, that we should be accessing. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the kids' results seem better. It's not that they advertise, it's results focused.
Yes.
And then you start co-constructing an alternative. You have to, of course, iterate that, keep trying it, trialing it, resolving the obstacles and the diagnostic issues you had missed the first time round. Just keep iterating that until the writing gets better.
Absolutely. And Viviane, there are so many points within that wonderful framework that you've unpacked. I did just want to ask you briefly, how important do you think psychological safety is? That teachers have feel that they are able to ask questions and that they're able to demonstrate and try and iterate. How important do you think that is in terms of?
Well, it's critically important, which is why in my book with these 4 stages, I am discussing the required interpersonal processes to create the safety the whole way through. So I have a structure of improvement, whether it's improvement in a class or a team or a school improvement, it's the same structure. And within that structure is an interpersonal process to create safety and accurate evidence. And that's why the book has so many transcripts of the actual conversations, because just being, up in the abstraction, talking about stages without actually talking about how do you have these conversations? It's not helpful. It's too abstract. Yes. You need to be able to demonstrate what Ardra always taught us. You should not give advice that you cannot demonstrate. And demonstrate it means showing, modeling the conversation.
It's so important, and what wonderful advice. And another quote that I read in your book that really stood out to me. Says that we don't need to have data on every decision, but we need to have our ideas challenged and checked. What we do need to do is ask, what have we missed? And I think that's so important. And why do you think it's vital to challenge some of these assumptions as you're going in and observing practice?
Well, let's go back to the medical analogy. The doctor's got an assumption that your back problem is because you've got a rotten mattress in your bed. Right? So he writes out the prescription, get a new mattress. You would be appalled because if he hadn't actually checked with you carefully about the nature of your mattress. If he hadn't also checked other possibilities, other hypotheses. If he hadn't, for example, had a scan taken. If this is a long-standing issue, so that's why checking is important. And sometimes that checking requires a quite formal process of examining formal data. And sometimes it requires just challenging, so that when the teacher says, well, the way these kids can't write because they're never there, they're absence. And so you say, okay, so let's just look at your at the student management system, at the absence management system. Let's just take a look. Louise's can't write either, and Sam can't write, but they're absent, but their attendance is really good. So it can't just be their fact that they're not attending. It can't just be an attendance problem. Do you see? That's a challenge. But the principle is you do not write the prescription without testing the beliefs about what's causing the problem, because otherwise you've gone out and spent however many hundreds of dollars on a fancy new mattress, orthopedic mattress, and that's not the problem at all. That's not the cause of your back problem. You just wasted a whole lot of more time and money, which we do
Absolutely.
in schools all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Vivian, and it's so refreshing to hear somebody talk about it in such a easy to understand way. I mean, reading your book was just a real breath of fresh air. I thought finally someone is articulating some of the issues that we have had all along, and I thank you for writing it, even in such a way that is so easy to understand and comprehend. And I'm spending some time in my classroom tomorrow, and I'm taking your book with me into some of my coaching conversations I need to have. And thank you for writing this book. It's so important. And you write, seeking is truth seeking. What do you mean by that? I know you may have covered a few of the elements, but what do you mean when you say that?
Well, the way this is based on Ardress and Schoen's work. Do you know those writers, those theorists?
I have heard of them. I'm not particularly familiar with their work.
But they developed the concepts of theory of action and single loop and double loop learning. They were the originators of those big ideas.
Yes.
And I had the privilege of studying with them at Harvard for 4 years. One of the most critical values in doing this work, indeed in life, I would argue, is that you are constantly reflective and open to learning. You're constantly open to learning about the validity of your beliefs.
Yes, absolutely.
So that is what but most people and our brains are hardwired to assume the truth of our beliefs, they're taken for granted. So we see the writing problem and we immediately leap to the inference that it's because of student absence. Right, we just go rocket up from the ladder of inference. And so it is critical that we are open to learning and able to challenge ourselves and others. Why? Because we are so powerful.
Yeah.
Because leaders and teachers are hugely powerful. They are shaping the lives and learning of their students.
Absolutely.
Every day. Yeah. They are making a difference for the well-being and the future life chances of students, and they better be careful about the validity of their beliefs.
Absolutely. And
so that's why it's important in life generally to be seeking rather than claiming the truth. You're a truth seeker, not a truth claimer. That is a central value in my life. And it's critically important for educators.
Absolutely. And Vivian, can I ask maybe more of a personal question? How do you do that in your own life? How do you make sure that you are, whether it be with your research or other endeavors that you're involved in, how do you make sure that you're constantly asking those questions and challenging assumptions?
Yes. Well, you see your partner, let's say, not doing something that you think they should be doing, right?
Yes.
So you pause and you ask yourself whether your belief that they're not doing it or won't do it or haven't done it is correct. And then you ask yourself, because you also value the autonomy of your partner.
Yes.
You ask yourself whether this is worth asking about. And then if you do ask it, you do not say in an accusing tone, you haven't mowed the lawns and you said you were going to. You say something like, I thought you were going to mow the lawns. Pause. Check.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay?
It's really good marriage advice there as well. Thank you, Vivian. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So you sort of, and what motivates that is that you want to be a better person. You want to be a better partner. You want to have a better relationship. Well, those sorts of interpersonal values and skills do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had leaders in my courses, that the facilitators who teach this interpersonal work, because I didn't elaborate it in this book, but there's another whole book that is about this interpersonal work. And we have, you probably know that in Victoria, we have a group of facilitators who we've trained and accredited to teach leading by learning. Well, they talk to me about how this is not only professionally beneficial, but in one case, at least, it saved his marriage. And that's his words.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really meaningful. And I'll put, Vivian, I'll put all of the links to all of the books and the resources that we talk about in the show notes so people can access them. And you've definitely given me a lot of homework to do on a little bit more reading, which is really wonderful. Vivian, I've just got a few more moments together, and I do want to be respectful of your time. And thank you so much for covering the vast range of topics that you have. It's really wonderful. But I just wanted to get your thoughts about the current and ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and what you think it has taught us about the work that schools do.
Well, I think, first of all, the evidence on what's happening to kids, and particularly from an equity point of view, has just shown us that the romance of remote learning is a romance, that kids who are already disadvantaged are further disadvantaged by remote learning. Obviously, the kids and children of professionals and middle-class people with the educational and cultural capital that is required for remote learning, they will do well. In some cases, they're flying. I mean, I can tell you about 4 families of my colleagues who are teachers who have tutored their kids during COVID to catch up on stuff that they were behind in at school, all boys. Okay, so those children have done better in remote learning than they have at school. Similarly, my neighbours' kids, incredibly bright, who are 16 and 17, they got their lessons remotely at 9:30 in the morning. They had finished them at 11:30, and they realised how much of their time was wasted at school. So so those are a couple of things we've learned about from so in the positive thing out of this is just how critical teachers are face to face with kids. And especially for those groups of kids for whom the only place where they will learn school curricula is at school. And those are the ones we go on about in terms of social justice and equity. Well, actually, remote learning is horrific for those kids. And I know that, when I listen to principals talking about what happened to their schools in remote learning, they don't say that, of course.
Of course they wouldn't,
They say our teachers coped brilliantly and pivoted from this to that, which they did. But the evidence is in now that the equity gaps that we've struggling with across the whole of the OECD and which are getting worse in New Zealand and possibly in Australia as well, although you're more on top of some of this than we are in New Zealand. COVID has been a disaster. Because one of the things that is really highly correlated with student growth is opportunities to learn, which can be defined quantitatively and qualitatively. But if you define it quantitatively, it's exposure to content. Okay? Now, there are all sorts of ways in which kids are not exposed to content that they're meant to be exposed to, through absence, waste of time in lessons, teachers, especially at primary school, not teaching material that they don't feel confident about, and on and on. Plus the term 1 effect and the term 4 effect, which is that serious teaching stops or doesn't start in term 1 and term 4 in many schools. So the COVID thing has just added to the problem of opportunities, of diminished opportunities to learn, while at the same time showing just how important it is for teachers to teach kids. And the other thing about COVID, I think, which I don't think has been perhaps as recognised as it could have been, is that the most powerful intervention for kids who are behind is tutoring, small group tutoring. And so I would have hoped that schools would have organised remote lessons by the kids that are self-managing, got plenty of resources at home, could have been given their lessons, occasional check-ins, but that's about it. And that teachers be organised and reorganised as tutors so that the kids who are behind have the opportunity remotely,
yes,
for intensive tutoring. The examples I gave, they got it from their parents and grandparents. But it would have been nice if more schools had organised to have teachers tutoring,
yes,
doing intensive tutoring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of small groups. Do you know of any schools that did that, Matthew?
My understanding is that we received a budget for COVID tutoring, but that was very much done once. I can only speak out of one school that I've been at, but was done once students returned to school, and then they were taken in many ways a learning support model. I don't know of any other. I don't know of any other initiatives.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's really positive that tutoring happens. And on the Bob Slavin's What Works website, he's got a wonderful blog. He's died now recently, unfortunately. He's got a wonderful blog about the conditions that need to be in place if tutoring is going to work.
Yeah.
Because like everything in education, if the implementation isn't done well, you won't get the results.
Yeah. And Vivianne, I'm just wondering, are you confident that schools can learn and improve coming out of this pandemic, or do you think we'll spring back into well-trodden paths?
Well, what paths would you want them to reconsider?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I think I'm mainly coming from the point of view is that it's easier to remain the same as opposed to make any improvement. So do you think we will learn lessons from this, or do you think school structures will continue to pursue old habits?
Well, old habits are fine if they're good habits. So the lessons to be learned are the same as the lessons whether it's COVID or not.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is which groups of kids in which subjects, which content, which well-being areas are suffering.
Yeah.
And how can we do a better job of meeting goals for growth for those kids? Now, whether you've got COVID or whether you haven't, I mean, COVID makes it much more difficult because you get distracted by 1,000 memos from the department and, having to reorganize all the furniture and the classes and the schedules. It's just an enormous distraction. But in terms of the lessons for improvement, it's that same lesson.
Yeah, the lesson doesn't change. Yeah.
Lesson doesn't change. People might, there's an enormous amount of romanticizing of digital technology and remote learning. Just a huge amount of romanticizing of it. And my focus is always on what's the evidence of student outcomes. And the fact that kids become more digitally savvy. That's fine. But is that translating into the sorts of understandings, the sorts of comprehension, the sorts of problem solving that those kids need to access tertiary and further learning pathways? And
absolutely,
often it isn't.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Vivian, just a few more questions. Like I said, I do want to be respectful of your time, but in New South Wales, in Australia, sorry, we are about to embark on another year of teaching. Schools go back in New South Wales next week. Do you have any advice or any thoughts that you would like to share for teachers that are about to step in front of a classroom, sometimes for the first time, in a potentially very difficult and challenging educational context?
Yes, I do. Decide what your priority goal is for those students for the year or the term, and focus relentlessly on that goal and doing the improvement work you need to meet that goal. And do business as usual for everything else, and don't do anything else in terms of other than pursue that goal in addition to business as usual.
Fantastic.
And business as usual may in many respects not be very good. You live with it. You live with business as usual until you can bring that forward as a priority goal for improvement. You've chosen one, maybe two. You focus relentlessly on that because you will never achieve it unless you leave everything else as business as usual.
Fantastic. Yeah. What great advice. And finally, Vivian, where can people find out more about you and your amazing work? Because the volume of work that you're engaged in is immense. And so it would be lovely to stay in touch.
Well, shall I just send you? I mean, I'm useless at social media and all of that. I've been reading about the enormous impact that the social media world has on cognition and our brains. Yes. and the attentional changes that social media are bringing to our brains, and what that's doing for kids' ability to read, concentrate, get in the flow, pursue tasks in a focused way. So I'm not very good at social media, and I don't particularly want to be. So how about this? I send you my CV, which is up to date, and it has all my publications on it.
That would be wonderful.
I will send you, I think my university website's probably way out of date by now. Yeah. So I will send you that, and I will send you a little bit about my forthcoming book.
Fantastic. Well, I can't wait. I can't wait to read that. I've downloaded a number of your books on my iPad, and it's going to take me a while to get through them, but I look forward to staying in touch. And I'm incredibly grateful for the investment you're making into our profession. So Professor Viviane Robinson, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I really do appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Matthew, and I look forward to the podcast.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Art of Teaching podcast today. I hope that you, like me, got some valuable insights out of our discussion. For show notes, please visit theartofteachingpodcast.com. I've one favour to ask. If you could please head to the iTunes page of the podcast and rate and review the episode. This would really help to get the interviews and resources to as many people as possible. Also, I've created a private Facebook group so that we can continue the discussion after each episode. The link is in the show notes. Thank you again for listening, and until next time.